Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, articles, research, expert notes, and we really just pull out the essential insights for you.
That's right. Our mission is to give you a shortcut to being, well, truly well-informed.
And we focus on the products, the ideas, the strategies that didn't just change the world. They changed it so completely that, living without them now feels like stepping back into a totally forgotten age.
And what we find so often is that the biggest shifts aren't always in the latest, the flashiest AI software. They're in these humble electromechanical devices that solve these persistent, universal human problems. So today, we're here to unpack all of that. The macroeconomic shifts, the behavioral insights, and the deep history hidden in plain sight.
Of what might be the single most revolutionary household invention of the last 200 years.
It might sound a bit mundane at first, but we are talking, of course, about the washing machine and the dryer.
That's right. It sounds simple, but I promise you this deep dive is about understanding how a simple drum and a motor basically became an engine for massive economic growth.
By the time we're finished, you are going to see your laundry room in a totally new light, not as a chore station, but as really a monument to human capital liberation.
And for me, this isn't just an academic topic. It's deeply personal. I spent nearly 25 years living in Zimbabwe.
Right.
And for that entire time, I never once used an automated washing machine. I washed all of my clothes completely by hand.
That experience, it must give you such a crucial baseline, doesn't it? It lets you viscerally understand that pre-industrial condition that most of us have just completely forgotten.
Oh, absolutely. When people hear hand washing, I think they imagine, gently rinsing a few delicate things in a sink.
Yeah, that's not it at all.
Not at all. This was arduous, back-breaking labor. It was a full-day commitment. It meant heating enormous amounts of water, hours and hours of vigorous scrubbing, often on like a rough concrete surface or with these harsh, caustic soaps.
And the wringing process alone must have been incredibly difficult.
Oh, it was exhausting. Repetitive, painful wringing. It was physically draining and, frankly, sometimes damaging to your skin, to your knuckles.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a slight inconvenience. It was a physical barrier to doing anything else that day.
So what was it like when you finally moved to the U.S. and used a modern, fully automatic machine for the first time?
It was overwhelming. The sheer ease of it, the ability to just load clothes, press a button, and this is the key part, walk away. It was a moment of irreversible convenience.
And I imagine the tech was a bit of a leap, too.
The machine I first used was even connected to an app on my phone. It would send me a notification when the cycle was done. I remember just standing there watching the lights blink and feeling this profound sense of, relief, grace, even.
That's a powerful word for it.
It was one of those moments where the whole baseline of what you expect from life just shifts forever. I realized this is the freedom my mother and my grandmothers never, ever had.
And that feeling, that's the core concept we're exploring today. We're calling it the air fryer effect.
The air fryer effect, I like that.
It's that irreversible moment where a product like an air fryer, simplifying a dozen kitchen steps, changes your standard of living so drastically that life before it just seems inefficient or unthinkable, simply medieval.
And the washing machine did that on a global societal scale.
Exactly. So our mission today is to trace that history, the engineering of this change, but more importantly, to really understand the civilization-altering power that it unleashed.
We're going from, hand-cranked wooden tubs all the way to Wi-Fi connected AI machines.
But the core thesis, the really provocative one, is economic. There's a famous economist, Ajahn Chang, who argued that this one machine did more to transform society than the internet.
Okay, that seems like an almost hyperbolic claim, doesn't it? The internet is the prerequisite for modern supply chains, for global commerce, for almost all contemporary knowledge work.
Right.
How could a device that just, cleans clothes possibly outweigh that global reach?
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's unpack this monumental claim and figure out why a drum and a motor might actually be more powerful than a modem.
Let's do it.
So, to really understand the washing machine's impact, we have to grasp the sheer scale of the historical problem it solved. Our source material, quite accurately, calls the pre-machine era the age of soap and suffering.
And that title is absolutely not an exaggeration. We have this tendency to romanticize historical simplicity, but there's nothing simple or romantic about laundry.
Whoa.
The methods used for millennia were just brutal. You have to picture this. Clothes were cleaned by literally scrubbing them raw on rough surfaces like rocks in a river, or later on those highly abrasive metal washboards.
Right, the washboards.
Or they were beaten repeatedly with wooden paddles, sometimes for hours, just to loosen the dirt. It was pure brute force.
And the cleaning agents themselves, they were often pretty hazardous, right?
Oh, absolutely. Before we had commercial detergents, people relied on these really caustic agents like lye soap, which was often homemade from animal fat and wood ash.
That sounds incredibly harsh on the skin.
It was, and for sanitization, which was crucial, clothes had to be laboriously boiled in these huge, heavy cauldrons over open fires. That required massive amounts of fuel to be gathered, massive amounts of water to be carried, bucket by bucket. It was hot, sweaty, physically demanding work.
And the really crucial point here is the historical division of that labor. I mean, who bore the brunt of all this?
Overwhelmingly, it was women. Across virtually every single culture, every community throughout history, this arduous, horrible chore was defined as women's work.
And it still is, in many places.
It absolutely still is. In communities in Africa, in South Asia, and other developing regions, this remains the daily reality. And if you have a large family, particularly with young children who are just cycling through clothes constantly, that workload multiplies exponentially.
So we're not just talking about a minor chore here. This is a systemic barrier.
Precisely. This massive, constant drain on time and energy actively worsens the living situation for women globally. It locks them into these domestic cycles. It effectively precludes them from pursuing higher education, from engaging in community politics, or from seeking formal paid labor outside the home.
You just don't have the time.
You have zero time for human capital development. When you were spending 4, 6, maybe 8 hours a week, maybe even more, on just intensive physical labor to maintain basic sanitary clothing for your family, there's no time left for anything else.
Okay, and this is where we need to shift our perspective. We're moving from the personal chore to the global economic engine. The washing machine's acquisition of the home is not just a technology story. It's fundamentally a human capital story.
Right.
And that brings us directly to that economist we mentioned, Ha-Joon Chang.
Chang's perspective really forces us to look beyond the immediate technological novelty of a product. He's the one who makes that claim. The washing machine transforms society more than the internet.
Okay, let's really dig into the defense of that claim. Why is the time that the washing machine freed up more valuable, economically speaking, than the time or productivity that was enabled by the internet?
It's because of the marginal economic return on the activity that was replaced. The internet, for the most part, offers efficiency gains on activities that already exist. Or it facilitates new forms of consumption and communication.
Right, like online shopping or social media.
Exactly. But it also often diverts time into leisure or, frankly, low-value activities, like just scrolling through feeds. Chang argues the washing machine didn't divert time. It liberated time from a zero-sum mandatory chore.
And that liberated time had to go somewhere productive.
It went directly into productive pursuits. It went into entering the formal labor market, into attending schools, starting small businesses, or engaging in civic life. You're moving time spent literally scrubbing dirt into time spent earning an income or acquiring valuable skills.
That is about as fundamental an upgrade in human potential as you can get.
It's the most direct form of human capital acquisition you can possibly imagine. We are talking about converting waste labor, labor that produces no disposable income, no lasting social value, only clean clothes, into human potential.
And that's why the economic return is so incredibly high.
It's enormous. Before the machine, the chore was so laborious that it had to be done all at once. It took a significant concentrated block of productive time away from the female worker. You couldn't just, throw a load in and come back later. You had to dedicate the entire day to this one task.
I can absolutely confirm that scheduling reality. Washing wasn't something you just fit in between other things. You had to plan your entire week around that one massive chore, especially if you had to manage the logistics of, carrying water and heating it.
And if we look at the macroeconomic implications of that, the linkage is just stark. We can track the explosion of female participation in the formal labor force in the mid-20th century in all industrialized nations.
And it correlates with appliance adoption.
It correlates powerfully with the saturation of automated domestic appliances in the home, chiefly the washing machine, and a little later, the dryer.
So are there actual indicators that, tie appliance ownership directly to national development rankings?
Oh, absolutely. Think of it this way. You can use the household saturation of washing machines and dryers as a really stark, tangible indicator of the level of labor abstraction that has happened in a developing economy.
What do you mean by labor abstraction?
It's the process of replacing human physical effort with machine effort. So a nation with low saturation of these machines implies that a massive portion of its potential workforce is trapped, performing manual domestic labor that creates no economic value.
Whereas a nation with high saturation.
A nation with high saturation signals that this labor has been abstracted away by technology. It's been automated. And that has freed those individuals to contribute to GDP, to pay taxes, and to drive consumer spending.
So the washing machine did just clean clothes. It literally created consumers and producers on a mass scale.
Exactly. It launched half the population of the developed world into the labor market, or at the very least, into enhanced educational opportunities. This dramatically increased disposable income, it diversified the workforce, and it directly boosted national productivity.
And that's why Chang's claim holds so much weight.
That's the core of it. While the internet optimizes commerce and communication, the washing machine fundamentally redefined who was available to even participate in that commerce in the first place.
It provided the human capital.
It provided the human capital that was necessary for all the subsequent technological revolutions to even take hold. It is the engine of growth hiding in the mundane reality of your laundry room.
That economic backdrop, I think, really helps us understand why inventors, starting centuries ago, were so obsessed with solving this problem.
Yeah.
They weren't just chasing convenience.
No.
They were truly chasing freedom.
Yeah.
The freedom from the physical drudgery that had bound generations of people, mostly women.
Let's trace that technological arc, because it began long, long before electricity was even a concept. The initial quest was purely mechanical. It was all about how do we substitute muscle power and friction for some kind of contained, repetitive motion?
So what were those first key attempts to solve the problem? Where does the story really start?
Well, the first significant milestone we find in the sources dates all the way back to the 18th century. In 1767, a German theologian named Jacob Christian Schaeffer patented a design.
A theologian. That's interesting.
It is, isn't it? It shows how universal the problem was. His device involved a wooden drum and a hand crank for agitation. It was incredibly rudimentary, and it still required intense manual effort to turn that crank, but it was a conceptual leap forward.
How so?
It contained the entire process, and it substituted the repetitive, damaging motion of scrubbing with a contained rotational motion.
So you're moving the scrubbing action into a device. You're shifting the effort from your arms and your knuckles to a cranking mechanism. It's still painful, I'm sure, but probably less physically damaging.
Exactly. And this concept was refined over time, which led to the invention of the rotary washing machine in 1782. But these early devices were huge, they were clumsy, and they often required multiple people to operate them, especially when you were dealing with heavy, water-saturated clothes.
But they established the core principle of the drum.
The principle of the drum, which is universal today. And then, of course, the industrial age arrives and everything gets scaled up and refined.
Right. The Industrial Revolution was key because it provided the sturdy materials like cast iron that were necessary for mass production.
And that's when we see the technology really start to solidify in the United States. In the mid-19th century, 1858, a man named Hamilton Smith patented a rotary machine. But the most critical innovation came from James King.
What did he do?
He created the first design that used a rotating cylinder, and that is the absolute core concept of a modern washing machine. The clothes tumble inside a rotating drum rather than just being agitated by a paddle.
So what were the major limitations of this, let's call it the cast iron phase, even though the machines are getting sturdier?
Well, the limitations were still logistical and physical. While factories could now produce these sturdy, more affordable cast iron tubs, which resisted leakage better than the old wooden ones, the process remained brutally manual.
You still had to do most of the work yourself.
All of the heavy lifting. You still had to manually fill that heavy tub with water, which you often had to heat separately on a stove. You had to crank the drum to agitate the clothes. Then, crucially, you had to manually drain all that dirty water.
And the worst part, I'm guessing, was getting the water out of the clothes.
The worst part was wringing the water out of the clothes by hand. It required immense strength, and it often led to muscle strain and torn fabric. It was just an awful job.
So the machine provided some assistance, but the core labor, the lifting, the filling, the draining, the wringing, That all remained firmly in the hands of the user. It's kind of like assisted suffering.
That's a great way to put it. Precisely. The mechanical washers solved the agitation problem, but they did not solve the water problem or the power problem, the true irreversible air fryer moment.
The moment of complete labor abstraction.
That had to wait for the marriage of mechanics and electricity.
And that is the electric revolution in the early 1900s. That's the fundamental shift. That's the moment the machine starts doing the work and the user can press a button and walk away.
That is the breakthrough. The ability to abstract power away from human muscle and rely on a continuous electrical current. And the critical date here is 1908. It's credited to an inventor named Alva J. Fisher, who introduced the first commercially viable electric washing machine. It was called the Thor.
The Thor. What was the specific engineering breakthrough required to make the Thor work, safely and reliably? Because combining water, a spinning metal drum, and an electric motor sounds like a recipe for disaster in 1908.
It was incredibly challenging. You had to somehow isolate the motor from the water while still transmitting rotational power effectively. Early models relied on these exposed belt and pulley systems, which were often very dangerous.
So what was Fisher's innovation?
Fisher's design had to manage two competing requirements: powerful agitation and user safety in a very wet environment. The success of the Thor was basically proving that an electric motor could reliably agitate a drum filled with heavy, water-soaked clothes without, shorting out or electrocuting the user.
Which was a very real hazard at the time.
A very real hazard. I imagine early adoption must have been quite slow, not just because of the cost, but because of these inherent dangers and the fact that electricity itself was still far from universal.
Right.
Absolutely. The early electric washers were these imposing, sometimes terrifying machines. You had exposed wires, rudimentary cutoff switches, and just the sheer violence of the drum's agitation cycle meant that users approached them with a lot of caution.
And yet they still sold.
They did. Because despite the hazards, the convenience of outsourcing that physical labor of scrubbing was so fundamentally transformative that adoption continued steadily in any area where electricity was available.
So then, as electrification spreads in the 1920s and 30s, we enter the era of competition. This is the true appliance wars.
Yes, this is when scale really takes over. Companies like Maytag, Whirlpool, and GE, they all recognize the immense market potential here. And they weren't just competing on raw function anymore.
What were they competing on?
They were competing on time, on safety, and on cultural aspiration. They refined the design, making the drums safer, the motors more powerful, and, crucially, they began integrating these machines into the aesthetic of the modern home.
So advertising shifted from "this machine saves you work" to "this machine enables the modern lifestyle."
Exactly. They were selling time and a higher quality of life, not just a spinning metal tub.
But even these early electric models, while they automated the agitation, they often still required manual intervention, right?
Yes. The user might still have to manually switch the water from the wash to the rinse cycle or physically move the heavy, wet clothes to an adjacent power wringer to get the water out. The machine wasn't fully autonomous yet.
So if the electric motor was the revolution, what was the final step? The final acquisition that completed the liberation process?
That happened after World War II with the arrival of the fully automatic washing machine in the 1940s. This was the crucial final step because it integrated all the multiple previously separate steps, the washing, the rinsing, and the spinning, into a single, seamless, non-intervened cycle.
What was the mechanical complexity that allowed for that jump to full automation?
It was the sophisticated integration of timer mechanisms and solenoid valves. The machine was now capable of managing its own water intake, its drainage, the water temperature, and the agitation duration, all sequentially.
So it was essentially a pre-programmed robot.
No. You had what were essentially these complex cam timers that were telling the machine, okay, now open the hot water valve, now agitate for 12 minutes, now open the drain solenoid and spin. And the most famous early example of this was the Bendix machine.
And by the 1950s, the Bendix machine and its competitors became these huge symbols of post-war prosperity and the ultimate modern convenience.
They absolutely did. They completed the process. They freed millions of women from the most strenuous aspect of domestic drudgery. The machine was now fully autonomous in its core function. It took the most demanding, concentrated physical chore and turned it into a passive activity.
You load it, you press start, And you are free.
You are free to pursue education, employment, or leisure for the next hour. And that transition is perhaps the single greatest time dividend ever paid by any consumer technology in history.
Okay, so the washing machine solved labor. It acquired those billions of hours of physical effort and converted them into human capital. But, as we noted earlier, that only solved half of the problem. The washing machine had a subtle twin that solved an equally profound, though maybe more psychological problem, the dryer.
The dryer solved uncertainty. And this is where the behavioral economics layer of our analysis becomes really critical.
Okay.
Imagine that 1950s household with their beautiful new automatic washer. They've finished the wash cycle perfectly, but now they still have to hang all of those heavy, wet clothes outside on a line.
And the success of that entire chore is now completely dependent on external factors you can't control. Sunshine, low humidity, no sudden gusts of wind, no soot from nearby factories.
Exactly. If it rained, the entire time investment of the wash cycle was compromised. Laundry day could easily be postponed for days. It could become laundry week, leading to damp, mildewed clothes that sometimes had to be rewashed anyway.
So this reliance on the unpredictable whims of the elements introduced this constant low-grade stressor and a planning nightmare into the home.
And that sounds like a classic behavioral economics trap, the kind of problem that thinkers like Rory Sutherland study. The problem wasn't just the physical inefficiency of hanging clothes, it was the vulnerability.
The psychological cost of that vulnerability.
That is precisely the insight. Sutherland would argue that we often dramatically undervalue the cost of waiting and the cost of uncertainty. Before the dryer, when you hung clothes outside, you were vulnerable to rain, to soot, to insects, to humidity spikes.
And that vulnerability had a massive hidden psychological cost.
A huge cost, which we call the psychological cost of pre-commitment.
Pre-commitment in the sense that once you start the washing process, you are mentally committed to the weather cooperating for the next 24 to 48 hours.
Precisely. You had to constantly monitor the sky. You couldn't reliably schedule appointments or leave the house for long periods because if the weather shifted, you had to rush home and salvage all the clothes off the line.
That mental overhead, that constant surveillance and rescheduling must have been exhausting. It eats into your cognitive bandwidth.
It does, and the dryer removed that cognitive friction entirely.
So the dryer, in this view, isn't primarily about saving the 10 minutes it takes to hang a sheet. It's about saving the 48 hours of planning anxiety and vulnerability to the weather.
It is about acquiring certainty. It turns time itself into a luxury product by giving users complete, instant control over the drying process, regardless of the external conditions.
The dryer basically says your schedule is your own. The weather is now irrelevant.
And in behavioral economics, the alleviation of that kind of cognitive friction and uncertainty is priceless. It's a massive upgrade in quality of life.
So let's look at the arc of that certainty acquisition. The early attempts to dry clothes indoors, much like the early washing attempts, sound pretty precarious.
They certainly reflect the desperation to control the elements. The first record we have of an attempt at mechanical drying dates to 1799 with a device by a man named Pochon. It was called a ventilator.
What was it?
It was essentially a large perforated metal drum that was hand-cranked and placed over an open fire.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was incredibly risky. Clothes could easily catch fire, and even if they didn't, they often ended up smelling strongly of smoke and soot. It was a very risky kind of medieval solution, but it was driven by the urgent need for dry clothes no matter what.
So how did we move from spinning clothes over an open fire to the safe, heated air circulation that we know today?
The key conceptual leap came in 1892 from George T. Sampson, who was an African-American inventor.
Okay.
Sampson patented a device that used a series of racks inside a metal drum and a system that circulated heated air, though it was initially heated by a stove. This was foundational because it shifted the technology away from direct heat and fire to circulated heated air.
And that is the core principle of the modern tumble dryer.
It is. That set the stage for the electric motor to take over the rotation.
So once you have Sampson's principle, you just need to marry it to the electric motor that was being developed for the washing machine.
Exactly. An inventor named J. Ross Moore built the first functional electric tumble dryer prototype in 1915. He successfully combined the heat source, the drum, and automated tumbling. But widespread commercial availability took a couple more decades to arrive.
And that commercial breakthrough finally arrived in 1938.
That's when the Hamilton Manufacturing Company released the first widely available commercial machine. It was called the June Day.
The June Day. I like that.
While it was electric, it was initially very expensive and it required proper venting, which was a new construction challenge. But it offered that one crucial commodity, predictability.
And I can only imagine the marketing during the post-war housing boom. They weren't just selling an appliance, they were selling the ultimate domestic freedom.
Oh, they absolutely were. They were sold as freedom machines. The tagline could easily have been, "Bring sunshine indoors." They were marketed directly against the unpredictability of nature and, the social stigma of having clothes perpetually draped all over the inside of your house when it rained.
They offered a radical new level of predictability for the household manager.
Total predictability. And we have to loop back here to a secondary acquisition of time, which is that the dryer also solves the wrinkle problem.
Ah, that's a significant and often overlooked detail.
It is. Clothes that are dried rigidly on a line, especially heavy items like jeans or cotton sheets, they acquire these strong, deep creases that require subsequent intensive labor to remove.
Ironing.
Which itself was another massive time sink for household managers. A good tumble dryer, particularly those large capacity models of the mid-century, could eliminate or at least drastically reduce the need for ironing altogether.
So the dryer acquires the time lost to line drying, the time lost to weather anxiety, and the time lost to post-drying ironing.
It's a triple dividend on convenience and time. The combined system, the washer and the dryer, it consolidated multiple highly labor-intensive, weather-dependent chores into one passive, reliable, autonomous cycle.
It fundamentally restructured the entire domestic workweek.
It didn't just save time, it turned chaotic, weather-dependent labor into predictable, scheduled, passive time. And that is the very definition of productive economic organization.
So as we synthesize this whole deep dive, it becomes really clear why Ha-Joon Chang and others view this device as such a powerful engine of societal change. It's an acquisition story of, really, epic proportions.
It truly is. The combined system tackled the two primary barriers that had been facing half the human population for millennia. The washing machine liberated labor. It took the concentrated physical effort completely out of the equation.
And the dryer liberated time.
And critically, it liberated cognitive bandwidth by removing that massive psychological cost of weather dependence and delivering absolute certainty.
So the combined force of these two machines allowed for a monumental shift of human energy and time into the formal economy and the education system across the entire industrialized world.
It did, and yet we must confront the critical caveat that really ties back to the beginning of our conversation. That's the global divide.
Right. While these appliances are ubiquitous in the US, in Europe, in parts of Asia, they remain financially out of reach or just logistically unviable for the average family, and specifically the average woman, in many developing nations.
So this story of liberation is not yet a universal one.
And the sources really emphasize that the spread of this technology remains a fundamental indicator of a country's economic trajectory. So why are the barriers to adoption still so high today? It's not just the cost of the machine itself, is it?
No, the problem is much deeper. It's systemic and it's infrastructural. We see three major interwoven barriers. First, yes, the high initial capital cost of the machine relative to the average income is immense.
Okay.
Second, the reliance on stable, continuous, and affordable electricity is often a non-starter in rural areas or even in densely populated urban slums. And third, these machines require large amounts of clean water, which is a very scarce commodity in many regions that are facing water stress.
So a machine that solves the labor problem but drains the local well or requires expensive, unreliable electricity isn't really a solution. It's a liability.
Exactly. So the technology exists to free people, but the infrastructure doesn't exist to support the technology.
And that truly connects back to the power of my opening anecdote about hand washing in a region where those challenges are the daily reality.
Exactly. The low penetration rates of these machines in those areas mean that vast amounts of unpaid, unproductive labor are still being performed manually, and that slows the pace of human capital development for those nations.
But the story isn't static, right? There are new trends emerging.
That's right, driven by rapid urbanization across the globe.
And urbanization means less space for clotheslines, I'd assume?
Precisely. As more and more people move into small, compact apartments without any yard space or access to traditional outdoor drying areas, the demand for compact, highly energy efficient, and water conservative models increases.
So necessity is driving innovation.
It is. It's driving innovation toward low-cost, high-efficiency machines that are designed specifically for these resource-scarce environments. We're also seeing community laundromats and shared, highly efficient machines appearing as a kind of transitional solution.
And that shift offers a significant upgrade in dignity and time acquisition for a whole new cohort of the world's population. It's democratizing that basic modern convenience.
And that, I think, is ultimately what this deep dive underscores. The greatest product acquisitions aren't necessarily in sleek software or, personalized AI.
Yeah.
They are often simple, durable electromechanical devices that attack the most persistent, intensive human chores. They acquire time and freedom from the relentless physical demands of sanitation and just basic survival.
The washing machine and dryer provided the ultimate acquisition, the ability to focus on self-improvement, on education, or on earning an income instead of devoting half your life to scrubbing clothes. The experience is truly, as we said, irreversible.
Once you've been freed by the electric motor and the heated drum, returning to the age of soap and suffering, or even just relying on unpredictable line drying, it just feels ancient, fundamentally wasteful.
And that's the dryer effect in its totality.
It's a massive shift in your baseline expectation of life and an irreversible acquisition of human time hiding in plain sight in your utility closet.
An irreversible acquisition of human time and labor, one load at a time. It's a remarkable legacy.
And this raises a final provocative thought for us and for you, the listener, to consider. And it builds on this profound concept of dignity.
Okay.
If the washing machine provided not just labor relief, but dignity, by removing the necessity of constant physical suffering and freeing up women for more meaningful work, what equivalent small-scale chore today, something that's universally done manually that causes low-grade suffering or stress or inefficiency?
If automated, could provide the next major leap in human dignity and time acquisition.
Exactly. Think about the mundane daily tasks that still steal your time and your peace of mind. What's next?
A fascinating challenge. What persistent, low-grade inefficiency are we all still stuck in, just waiting for our next simple electromechanical liberator? A thought worth mulling over every time you press the start button on your next laundry cycle.
Indeed. Until next time.